Remember when Gilligan's Island seemed like the simplest show on television? 7 castaways, 1 deserted paradise, and a 3-hour tour that never seemed to end. But behind the scenes, the real story of this shipwrecked sitcom was far stranger than anything that ever aired. We are talking about a boat name that was secretly an insult, a pilot episode so different that CBS refused to air it for almost 30 years, and a cancellation that came down to one executive's wife choosing her favorite Western over her own network's biggest hit. And trust us, you are not ready for what is waiting near the top of this list. So hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and let us know your favorite castaway in the comments. Now, let us set sail with number 15. Number 15, the boat's name was a hidden insult. On the surface, the SS Minnow just sounds like a cute, harmless name for a rickety charter boat. But here is where it gets weird. Series creator Sherwood Schwartz named the doomed vessel after Newton Minnow, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission at the time. Just a couple of years earlier, Minnow had stood in front of a room full of powerful broadcasters and famously called television a vast wasteland, criticizing the networks for churning out mindless, low-quality programming instead of anything meaningful. Schwartz took that insult personally, and when it came time to christen the boat that would strand his castaways for years, he saw the perfect opportunity for a little quiet revenge. Naming the ship after the man who had publicly trashed the entire television industry was a permanent joke that played out every single week, right there in the theme song, for millions of viewers who had absolutely no idea what they were humming along to. And what makes it even funnier is that Minnow reportedly found out, and was not exactly thrilled about becoming a punchline for decades. Minnow had delivered that famous vast wasteland speech back in May of 1961, standing in front of the National Association of Broadcasters and warning that most television programming amounted to little more than a procession of game shows, violence, and cheap comedy aimed at the lowest common denominator. Ironically, a slapstick castaway sitcom about a bumbling first mate was exactly the kind of show he had been criticizing, which only made Schwartz's petty little tribute land even harder. So yeah, every single time that boat sank into the storm during the opening credits, it was really Schwartz getting the last laugh on a government official who probably never expected a sitcom to hold a grudge for 3 seasons and beyond. Number 14. The original pilot had a completely different cast. Turns out, the Gilligan's Island you grew up watching almost did not exist in the form you know it at all. The very first pilot episode, titled Marooned, was shot back in 1963 with 3 actors who never actually made it onto the real series. Instead of the brainy, technically gifted professor, viewers got a mild-mannered high school teacher played by an actor named John Gabriel. Instead of Ginger, the glamorous movie star, there was a sharp-tongued secretary also named Ginger, played by Kit Smythe. And instead of sweet, wholesome farm girl Mary Ann, there was a bubbly, scatterbrained secretary named Bunny, played by Nancy McCarthy. CBS test audiences did not respond especially well to this version, and network executives quickly decided the entire show needed serious retooling before it could ever air on national television. So Schwartz went back to the drawing board, reshaping 3 of the 7 characters into the versions fans know and love today, while keeping Gilligan, the skipper, and the Howells exactly as they already were. The original pilot was considered such a mess behind the scenes that CBS buried it entirely, refusing to broadcast it until 1992, nearly 30 years later, when curious fans finally got to see just how different their beloved castaways almost turned out to be. Interestingly, the basic plot of that unaired pilot was not entirely wasted, since Schwartz eventually recycled portions of its storyline into a later Christmas-themed episode, retelling the group's original shipwreck through a series of flashbacks using the familiar established cast fans already knew and loved by that point in the show's run. For scenes with only Gilligan, the skipper, and the Howells, editors reused original pilot footage directly, since those 4 actors carried over unchanged. Number 13. Raquel Welch almost played Mary Ann. Believe it or not, one of Hollywood's future biggest sex symbols came incredibly close to becoming the wholesome girl-next-door farm girl from Kansas. During casting for the newly retooled pilot, producers auditioned several young actresses for the role of Mary Ann Summers, and Raquel Welch, who would later become a defining glamour icon of the 1960s and 70s, was reportedly among the finalists under serious consideration. So was Pat Priest. best remembered for playing Marilyn on the classic sitcom The Munsters around that same era. But here's where it gets interesting. The role ultimately went to Dawn Wells, a former Miss Nevada, whose warm, down-to-earth charm fit exactly what Schwartz wanted for the character's personality. Wells later admitted she had no real idea just how competitive that audition process had actually been until many years afterward. And what makes it even stranger is imagining how differently the entire show might have played out with a sultrier, more overtly glamorous Marianne standing right next to Tina Louise's already glamorous Ginger. Pat Priest, for what it is worth, had already built a loyal following playing the pretty, put-upon niece Marilyn on The Munsters, a role that made her instantly familiar to 1960s television audiences everywhere. Wells herself later said in interviews that she went into the audition with fairly low expectations, viewing it as just another opportunity among dozens she had tried out for that same year, never imagining the small farm girl role would end up defining her entire public career for the rest of her life. That single casting decision, made in a matter of just a few weeks, ended up shaping one of the most enduring on-screen friendships in television history, and it very nearly went in a completely different direction entirely. Number 12. The pilot was filmed the exact week of a national tragedy. This one is not funny at all, but it remains an important piece of the show's real history. The original marooned pilot was shot on location in Hawaii during November of 1963, with production wrapping up its final days of shooting in Honolulu Harbor. On the morning of November 22nd, right in the middle of filming scenes involving the SS Minnow setting out on its fateful voyage, a crew member reportedly rushed onto the set with devastating breaking news from the mainland. President John F. Kennedy had just been assassinated in Dallas, Texas, sending shockwaves across the country and well beyond it, reaching even this remote film crew working thousands of miles away on a Hawaiian shoreline. Production reportedly paused as cast and crew quietly processed the shocking announcement together, thousands of miles from home, on what was supposed to be just another ordinary day of shooting a lighthearted comedy pilot. It is a strange, sobering footnote buried underneath decades of coconut cream pies and bamboo contraptions. A quiet reminder that even the silliest, most escapist shows in television history were still made by real people living through real, heavy moments in the outside world while the cameras kept rolling regardless of what was happening. Production eventually resumed, and the cast and crew finished out those final Hawaii location days, carrying the weight of that news home with them, long before anyone involved understood the show would even survive its own troubled pilot in the first place. It remains one of the more sobering pieces of trivia, connected to a series otherwise remembered almost entirely for lighthearted slapstick, coconut radios, and Gilligan's endless string of accidental catastrophes around camp. A strange contrast that few casual fans ever learn about. Number 11. The Millionaire's Wife was secretly a real millionaire. On camera, Natalie Schafer played Lovey Howell, the pampered, scatterbrained wife of a Wall Street tycoon, dripping in fake pearls and elaborate designer costumes built purely for laughs. Off camera, though, Schafer genuinely was independently wealthy in real life, having built a substantial real estate portfolio alongside her husband over many years. She reportedly did not need the acting income at all financially, and apparently took the role mainly because she found the character delightfully silly and fun to play. But here is the truly weird part. When Schafer eventually passed away in 1991, a significant portion of her considerable fortune was left not to a relative, but instead to her beloved teacup poodle, with specific instructions that whatever money remained after the dog's eventual death should go straight to the Motion Picture and Television Fund Hospital. It was an eccentric, oddly touching final act from a woman who spent years playing one of television's most famously eccentric characters, blurring the line between Lovey Howell's fictional wealth and Natalie Schafer's very real fortune in a way nobody watching at home could have possibly guessed at the time. On top of all that, Schafer reportedly had it written into her contract that she would receive no extreme close-ups and no scenes involving quick physical movements. A small but telling detail, proving just how carefully this supposedly ditzy heiress managed her actual real-life image behind the scenes for years. She also reportedly kept her true age a closely guarded secret for most of her career, something colleagues found amusingly ironic, given how openly her on-screen character flaunted the Howell family fortune for laughs, right down to the fake diamonds and endless designer trunks packed for a 3-hour tour. Number 10, nobody could actually agree on Gilligan's first name. Sounds simple, right? Not exactly. According to Sherwood Schwartz's original series notes, the title character's full name was intended to be Willie Gilligan, technically making Gilligan his last name rather than his first. But Bob Denver, the actor who brought the bumbling first mate to life, apparently disagreed for the rest of his entire career, insisting that Gilligan was actually the character's first name. Full stop. No exceptions. Schwartz later joked in interviews that the two men argued about this exact detail practically every single time they crossed paths, decades after the show had already ended its run. On screen, the mystery was never officially resolved either way. No other character ever calls him anything but simply Gilligan, and the show quietly let the ambiguity stand for all 3 seasons, without comment. That tiny detail would come back to amuse fans for generations afterward, sparking endless friendly debates in reruns, fan clubs, and eventually online forums, all because the very actor who played the role refused to accept his own creator's official backstory for a character he had clearly made unmistakably his own. Even the show's own famous theme song sidestepped the issue entirely, referring to him only by the single name Gilligan throughout every single verse, quietly letting an entire generation of viewers grow up without ever once questioning it. Denver reportedly enjoyed keeping the mystery alive in later interviews, playfully refusing to settle the debate even when directly pressed by journalists curious about the character's supposedly missing identity, treating it almost like a running gag he got to carry with him for the rest of his career, right up until his passing in the year 2005, decades after the show first put him on the map. Number 9, the island's location made absolutely no geographical sense whatsoever. Throughout the show's run, the writers casually tossed out specific coordinates for the castaways' deserted island, and none of them actually lined up with each other in any consistent way. In one episode, the island's position is given as roughly 140 degrees latitude by 10 degrees longitude, impossible coordinates, since latitude can never exceed 90 degrees. In a later episode, the coordinates shift entirely to approximately 110 degrees longitude by 10 degrees latitude, placing the island somewhere off the Pacific coast of Mexico, if taken completely literally. And in yet another episode, the United States Navy locates Gilligan flying overhead in a jetpack roughly 250 miles south of Hawaii instead. So yeah, 3 different episodes, 3 wildly different possible locations, and not one single consistent answer about where exactly this fictional island actually sat on a map. Fans have spent decades trying to reconcile these numbers, building elaborate theories and hand-drawn maps, but the honest truth is that the writers simply were not thinking about geographical accuracy while cranking out scripts on a tight weekly production deadline. If you average out the more plausible coordinates mentioned across different episodes, some devoted fans have argued the island would technically sit somewhere in the general vicinity of the South Pacific, though the show itself never once bothered to commit to a single consistent answer. Continuity across individual episodes simply was not a major priority during this era of television, when scripts were often written independently and rarely cross-checked against earlier installments, leaving eagle-eyed viewers decades later to notice the contradictions the original writers never worried about at all. Number 8, the famous lagoon almost was not built at all. Before settling on the iconic lagoon set audiences came to know so well, production actually attempted filming several exterior scenes on location in Malibu, California, hoping for a more authentic tropical feel. It sounds harmless enough, but the shoot ran into constant frustrating delays because of thick coastal fog rolling in nearly every single morning, wasting valuable production time and money along the way. After enough foggy, wasted mornings, CBS made the practical decision to abandon location shooting altogether and instead constructed a dedicated permanent lagoon set on their own Studio City lot back in 1964. And what makes it even funnier is that a show entirely about being marooned in tropical paradise was ultimately filmed nowhere near a real island at all, but on a carefully constructed soundstage lagoon in the San Fernando Valley, proving that sometimes the most convincing escapism comes from the most unglamorous, practical production decisions imaginable. That same lagoon set would go on to appear in countless other CBS productions over the following decades, quietly living a busy double life long after the original castaways had technically stopped filming their own weekly adventures around its shores. Crew members later joked that the constructed lagoon was more reliable than any real tropical location could ever be, since it never once produced a single unexpected morning of fog to slow down the shooting schedule again, making it far cheaper and faster to work with week after week. Some longtime crew members even claimed they could recognize that same familiar backdrop popping up in totally unrelated shows years later. A small inside joke among people who had spent countless hours working beside it. Number 7. Marianne's wardrobe came with strict, oddly specific rules. It might look effortless on screen, but Dawn Wells later revealed that her costume choices were monitored with surprising precision behind the scenes throughout production. According to Wells, Sherwood Schwartz personally came down to the set to make sure her cleavage was not showing for more than 2 or 3 seconds at a time during any given scene, a restriction that sounds almost comically specific by today's standards. Premiering back in 1964, the show operated under far stricter network censorship rules than modern audiences would ever expect from a lighthearted island comedy about coconuts and bamboo huts. Every camera angle, every wardrobe fitting, and every single take had to account for these limits, layering an unexpected amount of behind-the-scenes precision onto what looked like breezy, carefree island fashion choices that audiences never once questioned. And here's the twist. Despite, or perhaps because of, those tight restrictions, Marianne's wholesome charm became just as iconic as Ginger's more overt glamour, proving that the show's tightly controlled visual restraint somehow only added to its enduring, old-fashioned, nostalgic appeal. Wells later spoke about those restrictions with good humor rather than resentment, noting that the entire cast simply understood those were the rules of 1960s network television, and that pushing back too hard against them could have jeopardized the show's approval altogether. She often pointed out that despite the strict oversight, the wardrobe department still managed to make her character feel playful and stylish, proving creativity could thrive within fairly rigid, old-fashioned network limits, turning simple gingham and cut-off shorts into some of the most recognizable, endlessly imitated costuming choices in sitcom history. We have to take a quick pause here because if you are enjoying these behind-the-scenes secrets, do us a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which reveal has surprised you the most so far. We have got some genuinely wild ones still coming, including the real reason this beloved show got canceled far too soon. Alright, let us get back to the countdown with number 6. Number 6, the skipper's father was already a genuine Hollywood legend. Hale Jr., who played the loyal, blustery skipper for all 3 seasons, was not the first person in his family to become a familiar face on the big screen. His father, Hale Sr., had actually been a prolific character actor decades earlier, appearing in more than 200 films throughout the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, including multiple Robin Hood adaptations, where he memorably played the character of Little John 3 separate times across 3 different decades. So Hale Jr. essentially grew up around Hollywood film sets, quietly watching his father build a long, genuinely respected career before ever stepping into show business himself. And what makes it even stranger is how differently each man is remembered by audiences today. Hale Sr. is largely known only to devoted classic film enthusiasts and industry historians, while Hale Jr., thanks to endless television syndication, became one of the most recognizable faces of an entire generation through a single, goofy sea captain role, proving that sometimes a son's 3 seasons of reruns can eclipse a father's decades of genuine Hollywood credibility. Hale Jr. himself had already built a solid, respectable career of his own in westerns and adventure films long before landing the skipper role, meaning the family's connection to Hollywood royalty actually spanned 2 entirely different, equally hard-working generations of dedicated character actors. Interviewers later noted that Hale Jr. rarely leaned on his father's legacy for career favors, preferring instead to build his own reputation through steady work across dozens of television and film projects throughout the 1950s and 60s, long before the skipper role changed everything for him practically overnight. Number 5. Ginger almost was not a movie star at all. Turns out, the glamorous character audiences eventually fell in love with barely existed in her final form, until surprisingly late in the show's development process. In the original unaired pilot, the character eventually known as Ginger Grant was instead a sharp-tongued office secretary named Ginger, played by a completely different actress, with absolutely no connection to Hollywood glamour or fame whatsoever. When Sherwood Schwartz retooled the entire show after those disappointing early test screenings, he transformed the character into a sultry film star specifically to give the ensemble a more dynamic, eye-catching presence and to attract a genuinely accomplished dramatic actress for the part. That single decision led directly to casting Tina Louise, who arrived with real film credentials and reportedly hoped the role would boost her cinematic career rather than typecast her forever inside a broad, silly comedy. And what makes it even funnier is that the very glamour built specifically to elevate the show ended up being the exact thing Louise later felt most trapped by, forever associated with a role she once viewed as a stepping stone towards something bigger and more serious. Louise reportedly turned down multiple later reunion projects for exactly this reason, wanting audiences to remember her serious film work rather than solely the character created specifically to lure her into a network sitcom in the first place, a decision that only deepened her complicated relationship with the role over time. Even so, Ginger Grant remains one of the most quoted and referenced glamorous television characters of the era, an ironic legacy for an actress who spent much of her later career trying to distance herself from the very role that made her a household name across the entire country, whether she liked it or not. Number 4. The same man secretly created two of America's most beloved sitcoms. Sherwood Schwartz, the mastermind behind every single castaway's misadventure, did not stop at deserted islands and bamboo huts. Just a few years after Gilligan's Island-wrapped production, Schwartz went on to create The Brady Bunch, another instantly iconic ensemble comedy that would go on to define an entirely different corner of television nostalgia for a whole new generation. He continued working on Brady-related projects for decades afterward, staying creatively involved with the extended franchise all the way through 2002. Believe it or not, both of Schwartz's signature creations shared a strikingly similar fate, quietly declining in the ratings during their final seasons before getting abruptly canceled, only to become massive, beloved cultural phenomena once they hit heavy syndication and reruns took over completely. It is a strange, almost poetic pattern for one writer's entire career, building not one, but two of the most instantly recognizable, endlessly quoted sitcoms in American television history, both of which nearly vanished into obscurity before finding their true, lasting audience years after the cameras had stopped rolling for good. Schwartz himself lived to be 94 years old, long enough to watch both of his shipwrecked and suburban creations become permanent, beloved fixtures of American pop culture, quoted and referenced by generations who were not even alive during either show's original broadcast run. He reportedly kept detailed personal notes and archives on both franchises throughout his life, treating his two most famous creations almost like extended members of his own family, revisiting old scripts and photos well into his final years with obvious pride and affection. Number 3, the castaways somehow never actually ran out of supplies. Sounds harmless, right? Not exactly once you really stop to think about it carefully. The entire premise of the show hinges on 7 people setting out for what was supposed to be a brief, 3-hour excursion around the harbor, yet across 3 full seasons, the group somehow seems to have an endless, suspiciously convenient supply of clothing changes, tools, and household items scattered conveniently around their camp. Fans and critics alike have long pointed out this glaring continuity issue, joking that the SS Minnow must have secretly been packed for a multi-year expedition rather than a short, casual cruise around the bay, with an apparently bottomless closet stashed somewhere just off camera. The show never really addressed this inconsistency directly at any point, instead leaning fully into its cartoonish, exaggerated internal logic where bamboo, coconuts, and the professor's makeshift inventions could apparently solve almost any problem within 30 minutes. That small detail would come back to haunt the show's reputation for realism among more literal-minded viewers for generations, even as most audiences simply accepted it as part of the charming, absurdist rules of this particular fictional universe. Later reunion projects even leaned into the joke directly, having characters casually reference the sheer absurdity of packing so many outfits and tools for such a short excursion, essentially winking at the very inconsistency fans had been pointing out for years and years. It became something of an inside joke among longtime fans, who enjoyed spotting fresh outfits appearing week after week, despite the castaways supposedly owning nothing beyond what they had packed for one short afternoon boat trip around the harbor, a detail that only grew funnier the longer the show stayed stranded on the air. Number 2, the show never actually gave viewers a proper ending at all. After 3 full seasons of near escapes and failed rescue attempts, Gilligan's Island simply stopped, with its final episode airing on April 17, 1967, leaving the castaways exactly where they had started, stranded on that very same island. At the time, nobody involved in production even realized this would end up being the last episode ever made, since the show had actually already been renewed for a 4th season, before that renewal was suddenly and quietly reversed behind closed doors. As a result, there was no closure, no dramatic rescue sequence, and no proper farewell arc ever built specifically for what became the series finale. Viewers were simply left wondering for over an entire decade whether the group would ever actually make it back home again. That lingering uncertainty was not finally resolved until 1978, when a television reunion movie titled Rescue from Gilligan's Island finally brought the long-stranded castaways back to civilization, more than a full decade after audiences first watched their little boat disappear into that fateful storm during the original opening credits sequence. That reunion movie proved so popular that it spawned 2 additional television follow-ups, effectively giving the beloved castaways the extended, proper send-off that the abruptly canceled original series had never actually gotten to deliver on its own. Most of the original cast returned for those later projects, allowing longtime fans to finally see their favorite characters rescued and reunited decades after that first fateful storm swept them out to sea, closing the loop the original series never got the chance to close on its own. Number 1, the cancellation came down to one powerful woman's personal opinion. Here is where it gets truly wild. Despite consistently strong ratings and an already confirmed 4th season renewal, Gilligan's Island was suddenly pulled from the CBS schedule under circumstances that sound almost too petty to possibly be true. According to Sherwood Schwartz and cast member Dawn Wells, network chairman William S. Paley had initially agreed to cancel the long-running Western Gunsmoke, freeing up valuable airtime that would have gone toward expanding Gilligan's Island instead for its next season. But Paley's wife, upon returning home from vacation and discovering her favorite show had been quietly axed while she was away, reportedly insisted that Gunsmoke be reinstated immediately, no questions asked. With Gunsmoke suddenly back on the schedule and receiving an even bigger budget to keep its stars happy and loyal, network executives needed to cut costs somewhere else entirely, and Gilligan's Island was the show that ultimately got sacrificed instead of its aging rival. And no, that was absolutely not an accident, or any kind of careful ratings-driven business decision in the traditional sense. One executive's spouse, simply unhappy about losing her favorite Monday night Western, effectively ended one of television's most enduring comedies for good, sending the castaways into permanent syndication instead of the proper 4th season nobody ever saw coming. Ironically, that syndication run turned out to be far more lucrative and enduring than a 4th season likely ever would have been, keeping Gilligan's Island in constant rotation on television screens for decades, long after Gunsmoke itself had finally, quietly ended its own remarkably long run on the very network that once sacrificed a shipwrecked comedy just to protect it. And there you have it, 15 wild and surprising facts about Gilligan's Island, a show that looked like nothing more than harmless, sunny slapstick but hid a genuinely fascinating history behind every single coconut gadget and bamboo hut. Which one shocked you the most, and which ones did we miss along the way? Drop it in the comments because we always love hearing from you and reading your own memories of watching this castaway classic growing up. And if you want more deep dives into the stars, shows, and stories you grew up with, make sure to subscribe and stick around. We have got plenty more where this came from.